He wasn't supposed to hear anything. The house was quiet in the way old houses pretend to be, too still, like it was holding its breath beneath the weight of its own past. Ethan Cole stood barefoot on the worn pine floor, the wood cool under his feet, a faint draft slipping through the seams like a whisper that couldn't quite form words. It was just past 2 a.m., the kind of hour when even the highway miles away seemed to forget how to hum, when the world narrowed down to the sound of your own breathing and the slow ticking of a wall clock that hadn't been replaced since the 80s. He had only been in the house 3 days. 42 hours, if you counted the restless sleep he barely managed. The realtor had called it a fixer-upper with character. The neighbors called it nothing at all. They just looked at him a little too long, then turned away like they'd already said more than they should. Ethan didn't believe in that kind of thing. Not after everything he'd seen. War had a way of burning superstition out of a man, leaving behind only what could be touched, measured, proven. That's what he told himself as he leaned against the kitchen counter, staring into the dark hallway that led to the bedrooms. And then he heard it again. Soft, faint, a sound so fragile it almost broke before it reached him. Crying. Not loud, not desperate, just there, like it had always been there. Ethan froze, his body going still the way it used to on patrol when something didn't add up. His breath slowed. His eyes shifted downward, scanning without moving his head. The sound came from below. Not the walls, not the pipes. Beneath him, from under the floorboards. He exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face, trying to reset his thoughts into something rational. Old houses made noise. Wood expanded. Pipes knocked. Wind found its way into places it shouldn't. He knew that. He had to know that. Just the house settling. He muttered under his breath, the words sounding thin in the quiet. Behind him, claws clicked softly against the wood. Rex had been lying near the doorway, a steady presence since the day Ethan brought him home. The German shepherd didn't bark. He didn't whine. He didn't even move at first. He just watched. His amber eyes fixed on the same spot Ethan now stood over, ears slightly forward, body tense in a way that wasn't fear, but focus. That was what made Ethan stop dismissing it. Rex had been trained to detect things no human could. Subtle changes, hidden threats, things buried beneath layers of silence. And right now, the dog wasn't reacting like this was nothing. Slowly, Rex rose to his feet. Each step was measured, deliberate, like he was walking into something unseen. He approached the center of the room, nose low, drawing in the air, then pausing directly over a narrow seam between the boards. The crying came again, clearer this time, not imagined, not mistaken, real enough to make the hair along Ethan's arms lift in a quiet, creeping wave. Rex didn't bark. He didn't look at Ethan. He simply stood there, staring down at the floor, as if he already knew what was waiting underneath. The room felt smaller now, as if the walls had leaned in while he was not looking. Ethan kept the flashlight steady, the beam fixed on the faint outline in the floor, while his other hand hovered just above it, suspended between hesitation and decision. Rex shifted beside him, closer than before, his body pressed along Ethan's side with a quiet firmness that carried more meaning than any command. The dog was not afraid. That was what Ethan noticed first. Alert, yes. Focused, absolutely. But not afraid. And that detail settled something deep inside him, the kind of instinct that had kept him alive more times than he cared to count. If Rex believed this was something to face, not something to run from, then Ethan would trust that. He lowered his hand and pressed his fingers along the edge of the panel, tracing the narrow seam where the wood met just a little too cleanly. There were no nails visible, no obvious handle, nothing designed to be found easily. Whoever had placed it here had not wanted it discovered by accident. The crying came again, softer this time, almost fading like a signal slipping in and out of reach. Ethan felt his chest tighten, not from fear, but from something heavier, something closer to urgency. He stood abruptly and moved toward the hallway closet, pulling the door open with a quiet creak that echoed louder than it should have. Inside, a few scattered. Tools leaned against the back wall, left behind by someone who never came back for them. A pry bar rested in the corner, worn but solid. Ethan grabbed it and returned quickly, the weight of it grounding in his hand. Rex followed at his heel, never breaking that invisible line that tied him to the spot on the floor. Back in the center of the room, Ethan knelt again and slid the flat edge of the bar into the seam. For a moment, nothing happened. The wood resisted, holding its place like it had done for years, maybe longer. Ethan adjusted his grip, applying steady pressure instead of force, the way he had learned to do when rushing only made things worse. The board gave a faint groan, a subtle shift that traveled up through the metal and into his hands. Dust loosened along the edges, drifting into the beam of the flashlight. Rex stepped back half a pace, not retreating, but making space, his eyes never leaving the widening gap. Another careful push, and this time the panel lifted just enough to reveal darkness beneath. Not the shallow darkness of a crawl space, but something deeper, thicker, as if the light itself had trouble settling there. The air that rose from the opening was cooler, carrying a faint scent of earth and old wood, untouched by the rest of the house. Ethan paused, the pry bar still wedged in place, his breathing slow and measured. The crying stopped, completely. The silence that followed was not empty. It was waiting. Rex let out a low, steady breath, the sound barely audible, yet filled with a tension that tightened the space around them. Ethan angled the flashlight toward the gap, the beam slipping into the hidden space below, revealing only fragments at first. Rough boards, a narrow drop, shadows layered on shadows. He widened the opening another inch, then another, until the panel shifted enough to be lifted free. With both hands, he set it aside carefully, placing it against the wall, as if even the act of moving it deserved respect. The opening beneath was now fully exposed, a square cut into the floor that should not have been there, leading down into a space that felt older than the house itself. Ethan leaned forward slightly, directing the light deeper, and that was when he saw it. Not clearly, not all at once, just a small detail catching the edge of the beam. Something out of place. Something that did not belong to wood or soil or dust. He did not move closer yet. He did not speak. He simply stared, his mind trying to understand what his eyes were beginning to recognize, while beside him, Rex remained still as stone, watching not the object, but the space around it, as if the truth was not just what was hidden below, but why it had been hidden at all. For a long moment, Ethan did not move, as if any sudden motion might erase what he had just uncovered. The beam of the flashlight trembled slightly in his hand, not from fear, but from the weight of recognition slowly settling in. Down in the narrow space beneath the floor, partially obscured by shadow and dust, lay something small and deliberate. Not random debris, not part of the structure. It was placed there, carefully, intentionally. Rex shifted his stance, his paws adjusting on the wood behind Ethan, the faint sound grounding the moment back into reality. The dog's attention had not wavered, but now his ears angled forward more sharply, catching something Ethan could not yet hear, or perhaps something that had just stopped. The silence below felt heavier than before, as if it had closed in after being disturbed. Ethan leaned in closer, lowering himself until his shoulder brushed the edge of the opening. The air that rose from below carried a faint chill, and with it, a scent that did not belong to neglect or decay, but to something preserved. Time held still. He extended the flashlight further into the space, adjusting the angle until the beam caught the object more clearly. It was a small box, wooden, worn smooth along the edges, as if it had been handled many times before being hidden away. The surface was darkened with age, but not damaged. Protected. The lid sat flush against the base, with no visible lock, only a thin seam running around its edge. Ethan's breath slowed, each inhale measured, as he studied it from above. This was not something forgotten. This was something kept. Rex let out a soft exhale, then lowered himself to the floor beside the opening, his chin resting just inches from the edge, eyes fixed not on the box, but on the darkness around. It, watching, waiting. Ethan noticed that. The dog was not reacting to the object itself, but to the space it occupied, as if whatever mattered was not just inside the box, but connected to it. Another detail settled into place in Ethan's mind. The crying had stopped the moment the panel was lifted. Not faded, not moved, stopped, like a signal that had been acknowledged. He reached down slowly, testing the depth of the space with the flashlight beam first. It was not more than 3 feet down, shallow enough to access, but narrow, forcing him to angle his body carefully. He set the flashlight on the edge of the opening so that it cast light downward, then placed one hand on the floor for balance. Rex rose immediately, pressing closer, his body aligned with Ethan's movement, ready without being told. "Easy," Ethan murmured, more to himself than to the dog. He lowered 1 foot into the opening, feeling for stable ground beneath. The wood below was firm, though colder than the floor above, and carried a faint layer of dust that shifted under his weight. He brought his other foot down, crouching slightly to fit within the confined space. From here, the house felt different, distant, as if the world above had been left behind with the light. The box sat directly in front of him, no more than 2 feet away. Up close, he could see faint markings along the lid. Not words, not exactly, more like shallow impressions, worn down by time, impossible to read, yet clearly intentional. He hesitated for a second, his hand hovering just above it, that same instinct rising again, the one that asked not whether he could open it, but whether he should. Above him, Rex let out a low, steady breath, the sound echoing softly in the confined space, a reminder that he was not alone in this moment. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, letting the decision settle. Slowly, he reached forward and placed his hand against the lid. The wood was cool to the touch, but not lifeless. It carried a faint warmth, like something that had not fully let go of the hands that once held it. And as his fingers pressed down, preparing to lift it open, the silence around him shifted, just slightly, like something unseen had drawn a breath. The lid did. Not resist. It lifted with a quiet ease, as if it had been waiting for that exact moment, for that exact hand. Ethan raised it slowly, careful not to disturb whatever rested inside, his breath held without realizing it. The hinge gave no sound, no protest, just a soft shift, like a memory being opened instead of an object. The light from above spilled into the box, revealing its contents piece by piece, not all at once, but enough to pull Ethan forward without force. Inside, there was no chaos, no clutter. Everything was arranged with care. At the center lay a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth, the fabric worn thin at the folds, its color once bright, but now softened by time into something almost colorless. Beside it, a few objects rested in quiet order. A child's drawing, edges curled, the crayon lines still visible under the dust. A simple wooden toy, shaped like a small animal, its surface smoothed by repeated touch. And beneath them, partially hidden, a thin stack of papers, yellowed but intact, tied together with a narrow piece of string. Ethan's eyes moved slowly across each item, taking them in not as evidence, but as pieces of a life paused mid-sentence. Nothing here felt abandoned. It felt kept, preserved, like someone had placed these things here not to hide them forever, but to protect them from something outside. Above him, Rex shifted again, a soft movement, then lowered his head closer to the opening, his breathing steady but deeper now, as if he could sense the weight of what had been uncovered. Ethan reached toward the cloth bundle first, his hand hovering for just a second before gently pulling it closer. The fabric felt delicate, almost fragile, and he unfolded it carefully, layer by layer, revealing what had been held inside. It was a small shirt, child-sized, the cotton worn but clean, as if it had been folded with intention, not discarded. Ethan paused, his fingers resting against the fabric, the reality of the space settling deeper into him. This was not just a hidden compartment. This was a place someone had built to remember, or to hold on. He set the shirt aside gently and picked up the drawing next. It showed a simple house, drawn in uneven lines, a figure standing beside it, and a second, smaller figure holding something that might have been a dog. The colors were soft, the strokes uncertain but full of effort. In the corner, barely legible, was a name. Not fully clear, worn by time, but enough to feel personal. Ethan did not say it out loud. He did not need to. The room above creaked faintly, a reminder of the world still existing beyond this moment. But it felt distant now, secondary to what lay in his hands. He placed the drawing back and reached for the papers, sliding the string loose with careful fingers. The top sheet shifted, revealing handwriting beneath, small and uneven, written with the same kind of care as the items around it. He had not read a single word yet, but he already understood something that went beyond language. This was not random. This was not forgotten. This was a message, not meant for anyone. And yet, somehow it had been found. As Ethan held the pages in the dim light, the silence around him changed again. Not heavy, not waiting, but softer now, like something that had been carried for a long time had finally been set down. Above, Rex let out a slow breath. And for the first time since the night began, his body eased, just slightly, as if whatever had called out beneath the floor had finally been heard. The paper felt lighter than it should have, as if time had taken weight from it but left everything else behind. Ethan adjusted his grip, holding the stack carefully so the edges would not crumble, and brought the top page closer to the beam of light. The handwriting was small, uneven, the kind that comes from a hand still learning how to shape letters into meaning. He did not rush. His eyes moved slowly, line by line, letting each word settle before moving to the next. It was not written like a story. It was written like someone trying to hold onto something that might slip away. Simple sentences, fragments of thoughts, mentions of days, of sounds, of waiting. The words did not explain everything, but they did not need to. They carried feeling more than detail. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly as he read, not from tension, but from the quiet realization building beneath the surface. This had not been written in fear alone. There was something else threaded through the lines. Hope, small, fragile, but present. Above him, Rex shifted his weight again, then lowered himself fully to the floor, his body stretched along the opening, as if guarding it without needing to be told. His breathing had slowed, steady and deep, the earlier tension replaced by something calmer, something resolved. Ethan turned to the next page, the faint sound of paper brushing against paper echoing softly in the confined space. The handwriting grew slightly steadier, as if the writer had found rhythm in the act itself. There were mentions of a dog, not by name, not clearly, but enough to recognize the shape of the idea. A friend, someone who listened, someone who stayed. Ethan paused on that line, his eyes lifting instinctively toward the opening above, where Rex's silhouette framed the dim light. For a moment, the distance between past and present felt thinner, like two moments touching without fully overlapping. He returned his gaze to the page, continuing. The words spoke of sounds in the house. Footsteps, doors, silence. And then, again, waiting, always waiting. Ethan exhaled slowly, the air in the small space cooler now against his skin. He did not need every detail spelled out. He understood enough. This place had not just been hidden. It had been used, lived in, even if only for a short time. The box, the objects, the pages, they were not random keepsakes. They were anchors, proof that someone had been here, had felt, had hoped to be remembered. He reached the last page and hesitated before reading it, his thumb resting lightly against the edge. Something about the stillness around him shifted again, not in a way that startled, but in a way that felt like anticipation. He lowered his eyes and read the final lines. The handwriting was softer here, lighter, as if written with less pressure, but the words themselves carried a quiet clarity. Not a goodbye. Not exactly. More like a message left open, unfinished, as if meant for someone who might come later. Someone who would listen. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, letting the weight of it settle fully this time. When he opened them again, the space felt different. Not empty, not heavy, just complete. Above him, Rex let out a slow, almost content breath, his head lowering until his chin rested on the edge of the opening. Ethan gathered the pages carefully, aligning them as they had been, then placed them back inside the box with the same care they had been kept. He did not rush to close the lid. He simply sat there for a moment longer, the quiet no longer pressing in, but resting gently around him, as if whatever had been calling out beneath the floor had finally been understood and no longer needed to speak. For a while, Ethan did not move at all, as if stepping away too quickly might disturb whatever quiet had finally settled into place. His hand rested lightly on the edge of the box, not holding it, not claiming it, just acknowledging it. Above him, Rex remained still, his presence steady and grounded, the faint rise and fall of his breathing the only rhythm left in the room. The air no longer felt heavy. It felt released. Ethan reached forward and gently closed the lid, lowering it with care until it rested exactly where it had been before, as if returning something to its rightful state. There was no click, no sound of finality, just a soft meeting of wood against wood. He stayed crouched for a moment longer, his gaze lingering on the box, then slowly shifted his attention upward toward the opening. The light from above seemed warmer now, less distant, and for the first time since he had stepped down into the space, he felt the pull of the world above again. "All right," he murmured quietly, his voice low, almost respectful. Rex responded with a small movement, lifting his head and stepping back just enough to give Ethan room. Carefully, Ethan placed his hands on the edge of the opening and lifted himself up, one steady motion, returning to the surface with a controlled ease that came from habit more than effort. The wooden floor met his boots again, familiar, solid, yet somehow different now that he knew what lay beneath it. Rex immediately stepped in close, pressing his shoulder lightly against Ethan's leg, a silent check, a reassurance that everything was as it should be. Ethan reached down and rested his hand on the dog's neck, fingers threading briefly through the thick fur, grounding himself in something present and real. He turned and looked around the room, seeing it not just as a structure, but as a place layered with moments that had never fully left. The walls, the corners, the quiet spaces. Between sounds, they held more than emptiness. They held memory. He moved slowly back toward the opening and looked down once more, the box still visible in the dim light below, unchanged, undisturbed. For a brief second, he considered leaving it exactly as it was, sealing it again and letting it rest. But something in him resisted that, not out of curiosity, but out of respect. What had been hidden was not meant to stay lost forever. It had been waiting, not for anyone, but somehow it had reached him. He stepped away and walked to the corner of the room, grabbing a clean cloth from a small stack of supplies he had brought in earlier. Returning to the opening, he carefully folded the cloth and placed it gently over the box, not to conceal it, but to protect it from dust and time once more. Then, with deliberate care, he lifted the wooden panel and set it back into place. It did not sit exactly as before. There was a slight difference now, almost invisible, but enough for him to know where it was. Enough for it to never be forgotten again. He pressed it down lightly, ensuring it rested secure, then stood back. The room was quiet, completely quiet. No karain, no echo. Just the faint hum of the world returning to its normal rhythm. Rex exhaled slowly and lay down near Ethan's feet, his body finally at ease, the tension gone as if a task had been completed. Ethan stood there for a moment longer, his eyes resting on the spot where the panel had been, then shifting toward the hallway, toward the rest of the house that now felt less empty than before. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Some things did not ask for words. They only asked to be found, and once found, to be remembered. And as the first hint of early morning light began to press faintly against the windows, Ethan understood something simple and steady. Whatever had called out beneath that floor had not been asking for rescue. It had been asking to be heard. And now it finally was. Morning arrived quietly, not with a sudden burst of light, but with a slow softening of the darkness that had filled the house through the night. Ethan stood by the window, a warm cup of coffee in his hands, watching as pale sunlight stretched across the yard in thin, golden lines. The world outside moved on as it always did, unaware of what had shifted beneath that roof just hours before. A truck passed in the distance, tires humming against asphalt. Somewhere farther off, a dog barked once, then fell silent. Ordinary sounds. Familiar. Grounding. Behind him, Rex lay stretched across the wooden floor, his body fully relaxed for the first time since they had stepped into the house days ago. His chest rose and fell in a slow, even rhythm, ears resting low, no longer alert for something unseen. Ethan glanced back at him, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching the corner of his mouth. "You knew," he said quietly, not expecting an answer. Rex's tail gave a single, soft thump against the floor, nothing more. It was enough. Ethan turned back toward the room, his eyes drifting to the exact spot where the panel had been. There was no visible difference now, no sign that anything had been uncovered, but he could feel it. The space did not carry that same quiet tension anymore. It felt lighter, not empty, but settled, like a story that had reached its final page and no longer needed to be told aloud. He walked slowly across the room and paused over the boards, placing his hand lightly against the wood, the same way he had the night before. This time, there was no chill beneath his palm, just the steady, familiar warmth of the house waking with the day. He exhaled slowly, letting that simple detail sink in. Whatever had lingered there had changed. Not vanished, not erased, just at peace. Ethan straightened and moved toward the small table near the wall, where the flashlight and pry bar still rested. He picked them up one at a time, setting them aside, returning the room to its quiet order. No urgency, no tensión, just deliberate, careful movement. Rex rose as Ethan passed him, stretching briefly before following at his side, his steps unhurried, his attention no longer fixed on the floor, but on Ethan himself. The shift was subtle, but clear. The mission, whatever it had been, was over. Ethan opened the front door, letting in a breath of cool morning air that carried the faint scent of pine and damp earth. He stepped out onto the porch, Rex moving. With him, the two of them pausing there for a moment as the light grew stronger across the horizon. Ethan rested his hands on the wooden railing, his gaze drifting across the quiet stretch of land beyond. He thought about the box, the drawing, the pages, the voice that had never truly been heard until now. He did not need to take anything from that space. He did not need to explain it to anyone. Some things were not meant to be displayed or solved. They were meant to be honored, remembered, kept in the quiet. Rex stepped closer, pressing lightly against Ethan's leg, his presence steady and grounding, as it had always been. Ethan reached down, resting his hand on the dog's head, fingers moving slowly through his fur. There were no words spoken, none needed. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying a soft rustle that filled the silence without breaking it. And in that stillness, Ethan understood something that did not need to be written down or proven. Not everything hidden is meant to be uncovered for answers. Sometimes, it is uncovered so that something unseen can finally be heard and then allowed to rest. The days that followed did not bring back the sound. Not once. The nights settled into a steady rhythm, quiet in a way that felt natural now, not forced, not held together by something unseen. Ethan moved through the house with a different kind of awareness, not searching, not expecting, just present in a way he had not been before. The floor beneath his feet no longer carried that faint question it once had. It felt solid, grounded, complete. Rex adapted just as quickly, his behavior shifting in subtle but undeniable ways. He no longer lingered near the center of the room, no longer paused to listen to something beyond human reach. Instead, he followed Ethan from room to room, relaxed, attentive, but free from the quiet tension that had defined his movements before. Whatever had called to him had released its hold. One afternoon, as sunlight stretched long across the wooden boards, Ethan found himself standing once more over the place where it had all begun. He did not kneel this time. He did not reach down. He simply stood there, hands resting at his sides, eyes steady. There was no urge to open it again, no pull to revisit, would have been uncovered. Some things, once understood, did not need to be repeated. They needed to be respected. He turned away and moved toward the window, where the light caught the dust in the air, turning it into something almost visible, something alive in its stillness. Outside, the world continued without pause. A neighbor's truck rolled slowly down the road. The distant hum of life carried on, unchanged. And yet, inside that house, something had shifted in a way that would never be seen, only felt. That evening, as the sky dimmed and the first stars pressed faintly through the fading light, Ethan sat on the porch with Rex lying beside him, the dog's head resting near his boot. The air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and earth, the kind of quiet that did not need to be filled. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze unfocused, somewhere between memory and presence. He thought about the small shirt, folded with care. The drawing, simple and honest. The pages, filled with words that had waited longer than they should have. He did not try to piece together every detail. He did not need to. What mattered had already been given. A voice had been heard. A moment had been acknowledged. And in that acknowledgement, something unseen had been set free. Rex shifted slightly, pressing closer, his steady warmth grounding the moment. Ethan reached down without looking, resting his hand against the dog's neck, fingers moving slowly through the thick fur. There was no command, no instruction, just connection, the kind that did not need explanation, the kind that existed because it chose to stay. The sky darkened fully, the stars growing clearer above, and the house behind them stood quiet, not empty, but at rest. Ethan exhaled slowly, a breath that carried no weight, no question, just acceptance. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Some stories do not end with answers. They end with something quieter, something steadier, the kind of ending that does not ask to be told again, only remembered. And as the night settled gently around them, Ethan understood one simple truth, clear and unshaken. Sometimes, the smallest voices are not meant to be loud. They are meant to find the one who will listen. And once they are heard, they do not need to call out again. In this deeply emotional cinematic journey, a U.S. Marine and his loyal German Shepherd uncover a hidden truth beneath the floor of an old house, where a faint cry leads to a forgotten story waiting to be heard. This powerful narrative blends mystery, memory, and quiet redemption, making it one of the most moving animal stories that explores the unspoken bond between a soldier and his canine companion. As the Marine follows the instincts of his dog, he discovers a hidden chamber containing a child's belongings, handwritten notes, and fragments of a life once lived, revealing a story not of fear, but of waiting, hope, and the need to be remembered. Unlike typical animal stories, this tale does not rely on action or shock, but instead builds a slow, immersive emotional experience through atmosphere, silence, and subtle signals that only a trained dog could recognize. The German Shepherd becomes more than a companion, acting as a guide between what is seen and unseen, proving once again why animal stories centered around canine loyalty resonate so deeply with audiences. As the mystery unfolds, the Marine realizes that not all discoveries are meant to be explained, but rather understood and honored, a theme that elevates this story beyond ordinary animal stories into something spiritual and reflective. Through careful storytelling and cinematic pacing, this narrative captures the essence of connection, loss, and healing, reminding viewers that even the quietest voices deserve to be heard. For those who seek meaningful and heartfelt animal stories, this experience offers a unique blend of suspense and emotional depth, grounded in realism and guided by the unwavering presence of a German Shepherd whose instincts reveal more than words ever could. In the end, this is not just a story about what was hidden beneath the floor, but about the enduring power of loyalty, memory, and the silent grace found in the most unforgettable animal stories.